5 years ago, the people of Dublin's inner city didn't know what a junkie was. Heroin was something you found in New York. Early in 1982, the people of Dublin's working class areas banded together to fight back against heroin. The Concerned Parents movement had begun. It spread to places like Ballymun. Heroin dealers who had once traded brazenly were now confronted with crowds of people marching outside their homes, their names brandished on placards.
Many of the people who make up the Concerned Parents movement regard the Gardaí not as their police force, but the guardians of the privileged against them. So instead of turning to the Gardaí for help, a movement grew which took the law into its own hands.
I think there's a sense now of powerlessness, that this thing has become too big. It's impossible to eradicate it. There's an estimated 15,000 heroin users in this country. There are 28 detox beds for 15,000 heroin users. I mean, that does not show any real interest in trying to deal with the problem. In Waterford, there's a 3-year waiting list. So if you're on heroin, you want to get off heroin and get onto a methadone treatment program, you're going to wait 3 years.
Waiting is done as a religious virtue, waiting for a miracle to emerge out of the calmly passing time, waiting for lesser things, money from America, a letter from England, waiting for the pub to open, waiting for something indefinable. A mysticism of waiting is practiced which strikes a busy Central European as almost oriental. The next morning is never distant in the land of the evening. One waits for nothing, yet one continues waiting. Not only the people wait, the harbors are waiting to be used as harbors, waiting for boats laden with freshly caught silvery fish. Most harbors wait in vain. Many houses are waiting for those who promised to return and never came back. The letterbox is waiting for mail that is no longer sent. The roof caves in. The curtain rots in the rain and wind.
Here we are, a land-loving people, a land-obsessed people. When we immigrate, we don't immigrate to agricultural areas. We're the great urban people of the immigrant peoples of Europe. In the mid-19th century, I talked about Germans. Far more Germans go on the land in the United States than Irish do. The German Midwest, right? Very few Irish go on the land. Even when they go in the interior, they'll go to Chicago, they go to St. Louis, they go mostly to the cities.
One out of every 2 people who've been born on the island of Ireland since 1800 have emigrated. I can remember vividly myself being in Boston in the late 80s, and I think at that stage there were 65,000 Irish-born people under the age of 25 living in Boston. You could meet more Galway people in Boston maybe than you could meet in Galway City at the time. And in the year 1860, about 260,000 Irish-born were living in New York, which meant there were more Irish-born people living in New York than there was in either Dublin or Belfast. New York was a bigger Irish city in the post-famine period than was either of what are now the 2 capitals on the island.
Most of the people that went to school with me, most of the people that I knew disappeared into England. I mean, in the 1950s, more than 600,000 people left this small country for England. I remember there was a very attractive Clare boy in our gang working for Tierson's, close to the River Thames. And most people got their local papers like the Roscommon Herald or the Leitrim Observer or the Kerryman. And it was those local papers that they read and passed around at work. I remember a piece of dialogue that I used is that somebody was reading from their Connacht Champion, or Roscommon Champion, that there was another wet summer in Ireland. And prayers were being offered in all the churches for the rains to cease. And this Clare boy said, and you could feel the rancour in his voice, he said, may it never stop. May it rise higher than it did for fucking Noah. May they all have to climb trees. To a certain extent, when they went to England, that generation that disappeared in silence, I think it was very hard for many of them. And part of that hardship was that the places where they were living and where their children were growing up with alien accents wasn't as real to them as the places that they had left.
I remember Professor Sean Lucy talking about some evidence he had seen from letters, I take it, home to England, to his family in England from what we might call a redcoat in early 19th century West Cork. Somewhere in Niamh Laoire, I think, Ballingeary and Shigila, the Valley of the Lee, describes the place as if it were a lunar landscape. Harsh, inhospitable, inhuman almost, as a countryside. And this is the very countryside out of which the poetry and the songs are flowing, you know. The enrichment, the human spirit, the imagination of the local population is finding expression in songs of affection and intimacy and love. But to somebody who is not a party to that, to whom this is a closed book, it is possible to have them see the place as a lunar landscape. There's always that division between local identity, which draws on the richness and the spirituality almost of the human imagination in its place, and the stranger who comes in as an invader or as a missionary or as a businessman and gets it all wrong.
It's like what Yeats says, the diggers of graves seem to be digging graves. They but thrust their buried men into the human mind again. A place that's deeply known and intensively loved reveals itself in all its layers over time. I mean, like Heaney says in a poem, every layer has been camped on before. That in Ireland, geography and history are not in the end separate disciplines. They coincide in the land, which is in a sense like a memory system. It's the ultimate memory bank. It is, a retrieval system even. When you think of all the elements in the National Museum that tell our story, have been thrown out of the earth, almost as if, they were buried in a Jungian sense, beyond the reach of consciousness for a while, but then suddenly erupt back into the story. Yeats said we were all born out of mythology that married us to rock and hill. What happens if you allow Tara get desacralized and despoiled? Maybe what you're saying is you're not really at home in the landscape anymore, that you're no better than the colonial squatters who occupied it for a time.
Yeah.